All right, this brings us really to the last segment I think we want to cover today, which is best practice. What is best practice, really? And I want to come back to the old orphan drug question that we started with, Hugh. How has the orphan drug research and pipeline changed over the years? It was started in the 80s. We're in the new millennium now.
Yes, and over as we mentioned earlier, again in 2012, about a third of FDA-approved drugs were orphan drugs, and the research definitely has picked up. In the pipeline right now, we have about maybe a little over 1,700 drugs in various stages of development. Definitely, we know not all of them, or close to not all of them, will not make it to fruition. But the interest and the research definitely has picked up. And I do believe that the incentives that has been placed in by the Orphan Drug Act of 1983 has helped a lot as far as given incentives to pharmaceutical companies to do more research.
Which diseases, which ones have been the greatest benefits, which has seen the greatest progress, and which ones have been the most controversial? Let's stir it up.
Well, I think oncology, I mean, definitely we've seen CML, for example. We've seen drugs that maybe about 2 or 3, or actually a little bit more than that, they have been approved over the last probably 10 years for CML and various types of tumors also too that we've been very successful with. Same thing with, I think, in CF patients with very specific genetic mutation. However, I think there were some of the earlier orphan drugs that were approved that are now being used beyond the original FDA indications. And that's always a concern, definitely, for any medication in terms of off-label use. Not that we don't allow off-label use, but then what data do we have to support, and what's the level in terms of the quality of the data that we have to support such use.
Are we piggybacking research here?
That's definitely happening, because what you also see is, even within the orphan drug market, is some of the companies also doing, I guess, what we call sub-indication, going for one indication first, and then continue to do research in expanded indications over a period of time.
Well, this is getting controversial, right? Because now we're talking about patient exclusivity, orphan drug pricing. Are you implying that drug companies are making orphan drugs out of some products, even though they know that going forward there's going to be a wider use for them?
Well, I would imagine that the economics also weighs into any company's decision to do research or to produce a drug. Given, again, the exclusivity and the wide latitude to price these drugs, and what I would call the lack of transparency in pricing these drugs, and being able to link it also to value that the drug is providing. Remember also, for a lot of those drugs, or actually for most of those drugs, the cost of promotion is very low for those companies compared to a primary care drug such as a statin, where you probably need hundreds of thousands of sales reps to promote the drugs, and your cost of marketing is very high, as compared to an orphan drug where your cost of marketing is probably very low, because it's very targeted, very few physicians that the pharmaceutical companies are targeting. So definitely, I'm sure the economics of it also provides an incentive.
Yeah, I agree. I would also add that the barriers to entry are a bit lower, because you're entering into a less crowded space.
But you've got hemophilia, you've got SLE. Are there any initiatives now to ensure accessibility of patients to the new agents?
If I understand your question correctly,
in other words,
are there
there's
limitations
a lot of drugs out there that are very
yeah.
expensive, but they may benefit patients.
Yeah.
We want to be sure, don't we, that the patients who need them get them.
And I think the answer is, in general, physicians may have the prior authorization, which I know they hate, but that's part of ensuring that it is the right patient for the right drug, and to the extent that it's been studied. And I think because of cost, those are some of the limitations that, if anything, I think will continue to occur.
And MCOs, ACOs, they fit in well with this, or are they actually antagonistic. I think I used that. You used that word at the
Well,
same
I
time.
hate filling out the prior authorizations.
Who doesn't? But so what?
It's the issue of time. And remember, I've always felt this time pressure that when I'm asking for a very expensive off-label use, such as rituximab, I'm doing it for a patient in the intensive care unit where hours matter.
You know, it's interesting though, because if the patient's in the ICU, you don't have to call the health plan. You may have to call the pharmacy department within the hospital. But when managed care usually pays a hospital bill, it's either a DRG, which is all inclusive of drug, or a per diem, which is all inclusive of what happens during that day. So you don't call the health plan and when the patient's in the hospital.
but
the
I-
outpatient.
I don't want.
absolutely.
I'll do this for you. I don't want to let this sit on the table. You're going to do a DRG.
Yes.
Here, hospital. Here's some money. Use it wisely. So you've just passed the hot potato, right?
Yes.
Now the hospital. You're not saying no. The hospital's saying no. We can't afford that. It's coming out of our DRG. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the Department of Medicine at my university would require me to have prior approval.
Exactly.
So
that's the transition into who bears the risk. And as we think about what accountable care is going to force us all to think about, in a sense, we're all going to be looking like payers when the entity that's bearing the risk is also benefiting.
they're offloading
from
the risk.
Exactly.
Well, again, as we go into the ACO market also too, definitely the hospitals are going to be mindful of cost. And not to say cost overrides quality. Quality always still comes first, or the clinical value of a drug still always comes first. But the reality of it is we have to deal with cost also. And the cost of those drugs are very, very high. Some of them up to over $500,000 per patient per year.